hello and welcome to everyone, and welcome back to season 2 of Blast from the Past, our show where we sit down and interview former members of Congress from both parties. Season 2 is starting with our 8th total episode, where we have Bob Inglis, former Republican congressman from South Carolina's 4th Congressional District, the Greenville-Spartanburg area. He served 2 stints in Congress in the 90s and the 2000s, and we're very, very happy to have him on today to talk a bit about his career, his entry into politics, and what he's doing after leaving Congress. So welcome, Mr. Inglis.
Great to be with you, Harrison. Thank you.
All right. So with that, I think we'll just get through with some introductions with the first question. So the first question deals with your entry into politics. So what were your earliest political motivations or interests, and how did your post-collegiate law career outside of the political arena help lead you to run for the House in 1992?
Well, let's see. My earliest political motivations, well, I think they were probably, let's see. My mother used to say, when I'd get up on the hearth in front of the fireplace, she'd say, "Bob, you're either going to be a preacher or a politician because you talk all the time." That's what my mom told me. So I guess that was my earliest demonstration of of political tendencies. But then, in college, I was really interested in politics. Really, I got to law school and found out 2 things. One is the law was more interesting than I thought it'd be. That was a big surprise. And the second was I came into real conviction that my only motivation really was ego gratification. So that sort of surprised me. And so my wife and I, we'd just been married after my first year in law school, sort of swore off of politics for that reason. Spent some time after law school in Savannah, Georgia, and then had the opportunity to come back to South Carolina in 1986 with a fuller agenda than what was just ego before. And so started practicing law, commercial real estate law, and then ran for Congress in 1992. So having never run for office before. So, but yeah, it was a early motivation was really just ego. Later, deeper motivation after a whole lot of soul searching and thankfully God moving some priorities around. So that became Inglis 1.0. I'm a recidivist. There was an Inglis 2.0, how did, and the second part of your question, Harrison, was about the law business, or what was that?
Yeah, it was about, did your law career at all help influence you in your decision to run for Congress?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at a law firm that didn't do politics. In fact, it was then called Leatherwood, Walker, Todd, and Mann. And Mr. Leatherwood had a rule. He used to say, you can practice law or you can practice politics. We practice law here. And there'd been one exception. A guy had been allowed to run for school board. And then I came along, and thankfully, my mentor at the law firm was also the managing partner. He came in my office one day, sat down, closed the door. That's a big day when your managing partner comes in and closes the door and sits down in your office. That means there must be a big conversation coming. He says, "Bob, it's one thing to run. It's another to lose and be in debt." And I said, "Oh, David, don't worry. One of the principles we'll follow in this campaign, there'll be no debt." And he got up immediately, said, "Good." And he left. He'd done his duty to warn me, that don't lose and go in debt. So it gives you an idea about how keen the law firm was on me running. Actually, everyone was surprised. Frankly, I was surprised. It was a pretty amazing result in 1992 that we won against a 3-term incumbent. Who was considered safe. And so yeah, the law, I was doing commercial real estate law, and that's maybe I hadn't really thought about it, but come to think of it, maybe it does set up a little bit of Inglis 2.0 because commercial real estate law, the good thing about it is there's a closing, and The seller has sold, the buyer has bought, the lender is making interest. Everybody leaves the closing generally happy, having come together. It's completely different than litigation. Litigation, the case is over and nobody is happy. Not the plaintiff, not the defendant, definitely not the client that's paying the lawyers. So maybe that's why I sort of gravitated in English 2.0 to that more collaborative model. Anyway, so that's how law impacted, I guess, my career in Congress.
Mm-hmm. And since we do a lot of election coverage here, could you briefly talk a little bit about your first race? Because the district at that point, overall on paper, was pretty Republican, but Congresswoman Patterson was a 3-term incumbent, had a pretty good lock on the district. So do you know what strategies you used to really, bring out the Republican vote in Greenville and win that district?
Well, yeah, it's like this. We had no money. It's one of the cheapest races in the country that year. Not the cheapest. My friend Pete Hoekstra, I think, in Michigan had the cheapest race. I think he spent like $35,000 and won in a primary against Guy Vanderjack, as you recall. We raised and spent $180,000. The NRCC gave us $50,000. So it was a $230,000 race. Nobody expected that to be successful, but we did an awful lot of door to door. I learned a lot in those 5,000 doors. And my friend Rick Santorum told me that he'd knocked on 15,000 doors in his first race in Pittsburgh. But I think that's because in Pittsburgh, maybe people open the door and say, yeah, what do you want? Here in South Carolina, they invite you in for tea. They say, would you like some iced tea? Actually, they don't say iced tea. What we just say here is tea, and that means clearly iced tea. It isn't like hot tea, And so that's why I told Rick that you got 15, I got 5,000 doors. But anyhow, so it was well, the way we did it was we had the right message, I think, for the times. People were a little bit frustrated with the Congress. The House banking scandal broke just as the race was ending. And that got my predecessor in some trouble because it turned out, sadly for her, had several bounce checks. And I know this is ancient history, but back then that was a big thing. So those things sort of conspired against her and made it possible for us to win in 1992.
And it was a very interesting race because it was one of the competitive races, so it was still close, but there was a clear dichotomy in support in the district. I mean, the Greenville portion, I'm looking at the results right now, you won by almost 20 points, and she won the Spartanburg portion pretty handily as well, but you ended up edging out a victory with Greenville because it was your home base, and you turned out the Republican vote enough to win. So I think it's interesting that you resorted to the door knocking strategy because I think that's a good way to get outreach. And I think our viewers will find it funny that the House campaigns were just so much cheaper back then when you look at how expensive House campaigns are now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean under $1 million is amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And isn't that incredible that Pete Hoekstra won, like I say, with $35,000?
Yeah, I know. I mean, now if you look at the almanac, you read about primaries or general elections, it'll tell you, outside spending, opposition spending, always millions of dollars.
Yeah. And Harrison, I have a view on that, by the way. I think most of that money is utterly wasted.
Yeah.
It may as well flush it down the commode or burn it in a fire because it is utterly wasted. Because at some point you saturate the airwaves, you saturate people's minds. It all sounds the same. They can't tell you what in the world you said on that ad. And the outside ads, my gosh, do those people waste their money? Particularly since they've got to pay the real rate at the station rather than the low rate that the candidate gets to pay. So at some point, I think people will wise up to that and say, you know what, why are we building a bonfire with all these dollar bills? Why don't we rather figure out messaging that actually works? But yeah. I got a minority view on that. I think message is more important than money, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate, before I move on, as you know, Senate races are even worse because then you go from a few $1 million to hundreds of millions of dollars spent. on a statewide race. And we'll talk about your Senate race a bit later. But I'll move on to the next question since you distinguish between Bob Inglis 1 and 2. What were some of your important policy stands and legislative accomplishments and doings during your first stint in Congress? And would you say that your main goals or beliefs changed between your first tenure in Congress and your reentry into the House?
I can't point to much in the Inglis 1.0, to tell you the truth. Honestly, I was surfing every wave of publicity that came along. I was self-term limited. And so my term limit happened to coincide with the, sounds like co-inspire that sounds like anyway, it coincide with the next reelection for Senator Hollings. So, it was all about getting ready for that Senate race. So in retrospect, I look in the rearview mirror at Inglis 1.0 and I sort of cringe, I guess one accomplishment that wasn't singular to me, though, is, I was on the budget committee in those John Kasich years. Truth be known, it was the John Kasich show, and the budget committee is run by the chairman and his or her staff, and all the committee members are really just props. So I was one of the props for the Kasich show. We did balance the budget during those years, so I'm glad for that, and glad to have been on the show at least for that. But that was about the best thing I could point to in Inglis 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes the difference between that and what became 2.0, I think, is it's just it has to do with that Senate race. So we'll have to talk about the Senate
I
race.
actually have a question about the Senate race in here. So first off, who were some of your important colleagues and political mentors at the start of your career in Congress? And then also, could you tell us a little bit about Senator Fritz Hollings and your 1998 Senate campaign? And finally, did you experience or did the experience of running a complex statewide campaign at all impact your strategy in future elections?
Yeah. So let's see, taking those the early folks that I was big on in Inglis 1.0, I really enjoyed Dick Armey, among other reasons, at a refreshing reception in early 1993. I sort of had a moment with Dick Armey, and I said, Dick, you lived in the office, right? And he took me aside. He said, oh, it's the best way to live. He said, you just got to live in the office, go down to the gym in the morning, work out, get a shower. You don't have to pack up your work at the end of the day. You can work till you drop. He says, this is the way to do it. If Susan, his wife, he told me, would let me, I'd still be doing it. But anyway, so that was, I very much appreciate Dick Armey's advice on that, because that's what I did for all 12 years in Congress, where it worked out pretty great, actually. And I guess I was part of the, in that Inglis 1.0, like I say, that I look back and cringe about. I was really part of the Gingrich fan club. My friend Newt Gingrich back then and still has an idea an hour in every 24-hour cycle. Back then, about one or two of them every 24 hours needed to be discarded quickly. And now time has gone on, and Newt has aged, and we've all aged, and maybe it's more like 7 or 8 in every 24-hour cycle need to be discarded quickly. Newt needs to hire somebody to follow him around and say, Newt, don't ever say that again. What you just said, that last hour idea, drop it. Don't ever say it again. But I was there in those early days where it's maybe 22 good ideas and 2 clunkers every 24 hours. So pretty good percentage, maybe. So that was Inglis 1.0. The thing that really created 2.0 was losing to Senator Hollings in 1998. As the race came to a conclusion in 1998, I was challenging Senator Hollings, a 32-year incumbent, Note to self, do not challenge 32-year incumbent in 70% right track territory. Generally speaking, do you say we're on the right track or wrong track in this country? First poll on a lot of national polls. 70% said right track in October of 1998. When I had won in a challenge race in 1992, it was 70% wrong track. So you don't want to challenge an incumbent in 70% right track territory. The economy was great in 1998. We had not 401ks, we had 802ks. They were on steroids. The stock market was fabulous. The budget was balanced. The tech boom was underway. So not exactly the best time to challenge a 32-year incumbent, but I did. A very notable pollster who will go nameless here because I don't want to embarrass him, because I think it was quite an embarrassing moment for him. He told me on Tuesday before Tuesday that we were in a dead heat. He told me on Thursday before Tuesday that we were 7 points up. Came Tuesday and we lost. Harrison, you might have the numbers there. I try not to remember what they were, but I think it was, I don't know.
Here, I hate to do this, but I'll show you real quick.
I think Senator Hollings got 53, 54 or something like that.
It was like a 7-point win.
Yeah. And so
you won your home district, though. That is true.
Yes, I did. There we go.
In the Low Country.
Yes, I did all right down there. Yeah, he beat me badly in the rest of the state. So anyway, yeah, Senator Hollings came election day, and it wasn't terribly close, right? And so it's funny that pollster, when I was going in for the funeral, that's where I told people, it seems like we're going to a funeral here when you go to make a concession speech, because it's like, but there's no body, and so I'm arriving for the funeral and walking across the parking lot, and the pollster is walking toward me, and we're out there in the dark of the parking lot, and he starts talking to me about 50 feet away. And so we were approaching each other, and he was saying to me, Bob, who would have thought tonight on the generic ballot test in South Carolina, it'd be 50-50 Democrat, Republican. And so I said, yeah, come on, let's go inside and get rid of this, get over this funeral. And so that started I filed a lawsuit shortly after that. It was Inglis versus God. My plaintiff's exhibit number 1 was a front page article, a feature story on Senator Hollings in the Spartanburg Herald Journal. Lead sentence: ask Senator Hollings what he's done for South Carolina, and he will say, quote, oh God, everything, you name it, I've done it. And so I laid that before God, and I said, you say in your word that you oppose the proud but gives grace to the humble. What happened? Your fault. And because in those last days when the polling was good, we all thought we were going to win, and it was a huge shock. I mean, it led to about 3 years of serious sadness, maybe even clinical depression for me, actually. My wife ran into our family doctor at the grocery store along that time, and he said, how's Bob doing? And my wife, who's normally pretty careful with, things about like that, she said, well, Tom, to tell you the truth, awful. He's awful. He's doing awful. And so he said, well, tell him to make an appointment. I want to see him. So I went in to see our doctor. He told me, you might be clinically depressed, and maybe I should put you on medicine. But he said, on the other hand, I think this is a spiritual matter for you. Let's see if you can just work through this in prayer, basically. And so, well, I had the opportunity. April 30th, 2001, waking up in the middle of the night. uh, going to go to the bathroom, standing there thinking, not feeling too well. Next thing I know, I'm waking up on the floor. Blood is everywhere. I've passed out and hit my 6 front teeth on the bathroom counter on the way down, driving them up in my head. And so I'm coming to on the floor and I'm thinking heart attack, aneurysm, blood clot. That's what they were thinking at the hospital too. Second hospital, they said CAT scan and everything. Emergency doctor came in and said, "You're dehydrated." And my wife said, "What are you talking about? It's a heart attack, aneurysm, blood clot, something really sexy." He says, "No." He didn't have much bedside manner. He said, "Your body's at its peak at 30. Every decade thereafter, it's downhill. Take better care of yourself. Drink more water." The day before, I'd been down a river with our kids, 8 hours, April 30th, 2001. Not a drop to drink, which in retrospect is really stupid. Practical point here for all your listeners. Drink water. Do not go 8 hours without water. But it wasn't hot, and now it's not uncomfortable. But in retrospect, that's really dumb. And so here's another practical pointer. If you have a tooth emergency, they don't care in the emergency room, but your dentist does care. And so go immediately to the dentist, which is what we did. He canceled his morning and he went to work pulling my teeth down into place. And one he couldn't find. My wife called the babysitter, said, "Look and see if you can find that tooth on the bathroom floor." She looked twice. She said, "I can't find it. It's not there." Later, he found it. It was just so far up there that he had to go way up and get it. Anyway, you feeling okay, Harrison, now that I'm telling you all this?
Yeah.
Some people get a little bit queasy in this.
No, it's fine. That's just a very unlucky accident that you fell in that direction.
Yeah. Well, actually, not unlucky, because just think about it. If it had been just a fraction of an inch back, I might have hit my nose driving into my brain, and then I would have been dead. So as it was, my teeth took the brunt of it. And so there on the floor, here finally is a punchline. There on the floor, I remembered a sermon that our pastor had preached recently about how God had consented to appear at the bar of justice to be tried essentially by Israel. And then Israel says, "Oh, no, that's not a good idea." And so that came to mind. It's like this still quiet voice saying, "What are you going to do now?" Because really, for 3 years, I'd been litigating with God about this Senate loss. And so my words were, what happened to me? What happened to my teeth? Because my dentist used to say to me every time I went in, he said, "Those are the prettiest teeth." He said, "I would trade my teeth for yours any day of the week." And so it's really quite something I was really happy with, me and my teeth. Well, now they were smashed. So it's like, what happened to me? What happened to my teeth? But God is good, and this is going to be all right, because really, he was there reminding me of that sermon. And so what led to was this. In the recovery, God really got through to me. It's like this. We had posited Senator Hollings as the most arrogant guy ever. And wouldn't you rather have this nice, young at the time, Boy Scout to go up there and represent you rather than that arrogant old goat? Well, South Carolina said, "No, we'll take the goat, thank you." But anyway, so that was our theory of the case. Okay, now I'll tell you, Harrison, don't ever run a campaign where that's the theory of the case. That's a ridiculous campaign. But that's what we did. That's what we did in 1998. So God got through to me. It's like, basically, Inglis, the distance from up here between you and Hollings, now, the distance between where you and Hollings are standing shoulder to shoulder and my righteous standard is eternity, which is bridged by grace at the cross. Now, do you want to talk to me about the grace that covers that expanse, or do you want to talk about relative justice? And I said, "Yeah, grace. Let's talk about grace." "Great. It's going to change everything about you. It's going to change your view of politics. It's going to change your view of life. This, even though I was a person of faith, but still I had to learn this lesson that I wasn't any better than Senator Hollings. I was a beggar who'd found bread, not somebody who's so clever to have figured something out about grace. No, it was a free gift. And so, anyway, that's what created Inglis 2.0. More than you probably didn't expect that explanation, did you, Harrison? It started with a teeth banging, actually,
Well, it was a really
and then turned into Inglis 2.0.
It's a very interesting explanation. I found it very interesting how you tied that all together, and it flows really well into our next section of the interview, which is going to start talking about the second half of your career. So, interestingly enough, it was the retirement of Hollings in 2004 that reopened your spot in the House, because Jim DeMint left your old seat and won his Senate seat. So, I guess I should ask you. Even though you followed your term limit pledge originally in the 90s, what drew you back to public service, and what convinced you to run in your old district and get back into public service?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. By the way, I should tell you that because it became Inglis 2.0 and because of that experience with Grace, actually ended up with good relations with Liz Patterson, the person I beat in 1992, who's dead now, sadly, and also became friends with Senator Hollings, who also sadly is now dead. But yeah, it's great. Senator Hollings called me up to show you how really he was very gracious to me, not just me learning grace and extending it to him, but he was very gracious to me. He called me up when I got the Profiling Courage Award, and he said, Bob, they never gave me that award. And I'm thinking, oh, this is an awkward moment. I mean, what am I going to say to Senator Hollings, who actually knew John F. Kennedy? I mean, and so he continued. He said, but I got something better. And I said, yes, Senator, what was that? He said, I carried the state of South Carolina for John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1960. I got something better. And I said, yes, Senator, you did. You got something better. And so anyway, but yeah, it's great to sort of patch it up with both Liz and Senator Hollings.
I mean, he was an iconic senator. I mean, the Thurman Hollings duo is one of the longest serving twin delegation of senators from any state, and yeah, he had an iconic accent too. So,
oh yeah. Senator Hollings, the way to understand Senator Hollings, by the way, was his famous line about. He used to say his wife's name was Pizzi, and so he said, "Pizzi and I get along just fine because we're both in love with the same man." And so there's a lot of truth to that, but maybe that's true of all of us, as we're all in love with ourselves. But anyhow, so what was your question, Harrison? I got all distracted there about.
Oh, no, that's fine. It was kind of a dual question. So, what drew you back to your open seat in the 4th district? Because DeMint ran for Senate, and do you have any new colleagues or friends as well from your second stint in the House that you'd like to talk about or add?
Yeah, so 2.0 is really quite different, of course. I went back with the idea that I might stay a long time. And by the way, we thought it'd be a real problem that I had committed to term limits and I was running again. We put it in our brochure. It was a mistake, period. That's what we put. And I'd go around handing that brochure out and people would look at it and they'd say, well, we thought it was a dumb idea to start with, Inglis, so we're glad you figured it out. And basically, that was the marketing response was, or I could have done some market research and found out that's what most people were thinking if they were attuned to politics. Now, of course, people that aren't attuned to politics probably sort of think it's a good idea still. But anyway, so that worked out for us. In answer to your question, what I'd found in law school, I'd come to a deeper understanding of politics, but it wasn't. I mean, we're all hopefully growing, and so there was a time then when I came to a deeper understanding of grace too, as Inglis 2.0 came around. But so I wanted to serve. I knew that there were things that really charged me up that I was excited about. And so, I see myself as a free enterprise, individual responsibility, individual freedom Republican. And that means that, you use the power of free enterprise to accomplish things. And so in 2.0, I'd come back with a different view on a very big issue of climate change. In 1.0, I said it was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. And that was the end of the inquiry as I was racing off to run for the Senate, right? And so then I was out of Congress for those 6 years, running again in 2004. My son, who just turned 18, came to me that year. So he's voting for the first time. And he's told me, Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment. His 4 sisters agreed. His mother agreed. That's a new constituency. You need to respond to those people. They can change the locks on the doors to your house. So that was step 1 of a 3-step metamorphosis. Step 2 is going to Antarctica, seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. Step 3 was another science committee trip and something of a spiritual awakening at the Great Barrier Reef. Aussie climate scientists showing us coral bleaching and also the glories of the Great Barrier Reef. I could see him worshiping God and what he was showing me. I knew we shared a worldview. Later, we had a chance to talk. He told me about conservation changes he was making in his life to love God and love people. I got right inspired. I wanted to be like Scott, who's now become a very dear friend and loving God and loving people. So I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. That's a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax. Means revenue neutral means you cut taxes somewhere else or you dividend all the money back to the citizenry. Border adjustable means you apply the tax to Chinese goods and other countries' goods coming in if they don't have the same carbon tax. So it makes it in their interest to follow our lead. And affects climate change through the power of free enterprise, exactly what Milton Friedman would tell us to do today. Don't try to regulate pollution, is what he'd say. Tax it. Tax pollution. Put the price in on it, and then the free enterprise system can solve it. So that became my big thing in Inglis 2.0. I described it more as energy innovation, but it was all about solving that climate challenge. Mm-hmm. And so the friends that I had along the way actually turned out to be, because of the teeth banging and the what I came to understand after that 3 years of litigation with God, were some Republicans and some Democrats. So, had some Republican friends, very much enjoyed time with John Boehner, for example. And then on the Democratic side, my friend Brian Baird and I shared, I'd been chairman of a subcommittee at Science. He became chairman when the House flipped. And so we were friends and went on those trips to Antarctica, for example, together. So those were some of the folks that I was relating to and really wanted to find a way to get toward creative collaboration and away from grudging compromise.
Mm-hmm. And that plays well into the next question. Although first I wanted to tell a brief story you reminded me of when you talked about the term limit pledge, which didn't end up being much of an issue in your race. But there was a funny story where ahead of the 1992 elections, there was a Democratic senator from North Dakota named Kent Conrad, and he promised his state that he would not run for re-election if the deficit were higher after his term was up, and it was. So he ended up retiring from that seat, but then his colleague on the other seat died, and he ran in the special election for that seat and kept serving. So I just thought that was a funny way to do it, because he could technically say, I didn't run in my original seat, but I just switched over to the other seat.
Yeah. Wow, how about that? Interesting.
Yeah. So it just shows that over time, some politicians might regret term limit pledges if they have more to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think term limits, what you find out is there's not a panacea. We have met the problem, and the problem is us. I mean, that's and that we can all say, not just politicians. All citizens should look in the mirror with Pogo, who made that statement. We've found the problem, and the problem is us. And the problem is that sometimes you come up with a solution like term limits, and you say, "Oh, that'll fix it." Well, probably not a panacea, because then what you end up with is not necessarily the bureaucrats running the place, but what you end up with is a bunch of people like I was, frankly, in 1.0, where I was gunning for the next higher seat, and when I was running again in 04, I went on the House floor because, former members have privileges to go on the House floor. And so I found Henry Hyde, Republican from Illinois, gone now, sadly. But Henry was the dean of the House at that point, the longest serving member. And so I went and sat with him on the back row. And I said, "Henry, when we were having the term limit debate in the contract with America, you said to me and to people like me that we were just attacking this House for our own benefit." And I told him, "Henry, it hurt because it was true." And I said, "I'm sorry." And he tapped me on the knee and he said, "That's okay, Bob." So I took that as an absolution from the dean of the House that, yes, I had attacked the House for my own personal benefit. And he forgave it. And so then I was running again in 04 and had hoped to serve for a long time, but that didn't happen. I got tossed out.
Yeah, that's another question. But yeah, I mean, term limits, it's interesting. I personally don't think it's a very good idea for either chamber of Congress because, a lot of times these members who go on to make long tenures and serve for many decades end up being mentors and guides to new members. And I honestly feel like it would kind of throw the House for a loop if you had term limits, because you wouldn't have anybody really accumulating a long tenure in the House, gaining influence, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that is the corresponding argument. In other words, there is no panacea. The problem is us, and we need to bridle our appetites and figure out how to do things without bankrupting the country. I mean, that's what we need to do. So the problem is us, all of us. But you're exactly right. The difference between me and Henry Hyde was, and this is what I said sitting with Henry, I said, "Henry, you've served a long time in this House," because he loved the House and he loved its procedures and he loved everything about it. And so which was more noble? Me going there attacking the House so that I could run, get elected to the House and then run for the Senate, who knows, run for president or something. Except I didn't have presidential hair. I still don't have presidential hair. Maybe that's not required anymore, though. I don't know.
I don't think so.
But anyway, or Henry, who is more noble, me attacking the House or Henry serving there all those years? Well, I think I could make the case that more noble for Henry, Henry Hyde serving there and really being quite the servant of the House. So anyway, it's there. I don't think that there's a simple solution to our challenge of figuring out how to bridle our appetites and our passions. It's not like you can do that by simple legislation about term limits.
Mm-hmm. So the next question deals with the qualities that you would say defined you as a public servant and a legislator in Inglis 2.0. And I think you've already touched on a lot of those. So we'll focus more on some of the specific times you broke with the other members of your party's caucus. So you notably opposed the Iraq War troop surge in 2007. You backed the bank bailout, the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, and you're pretty outspoken. I mean, you continue to be to this day, which is admirable, about the issue of climate change. And as you mentioned, the revenue neutral carbon tax as a proposal. I think I remember reading you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about it as well. So could you explain some of these stands? Why were they important to you? And out of those policy issues, is there any policy stance from that time that you would reconsider today with the benefit of hindsight or looking back? Or do you still hold true to those beliefs without any changes?
Yeah, you've got my list of sins there that I committed against the Republican orthodoxy that developed as the Tea Party came on. You might add that I think the district could sort of tell that I didn't have it out for gay folks, and that put me in bad way with some of the Republican primary electorate. And immigration was a place where I was for comprehensive immigration reform. We never called it quite that, but they could tell that I didn't have it out for immigrants. So that completes the list of my sins against Republican orthodoxy as the Tea Party came on. And speaking, just sort of like term limits is what the Tea Party needs to understand, just like AOC needs to understand on the left, is really, please don't posit yourself as the savior, and please don't posit yourself as having the solution to all these problems. They're really more nuanced than that. And the challenge in politics is it's hard to do nuance. Simplistic works better on bumper stickers, but it usually makes for pretty dumb policy. Because I'll tell you this, Harrison, after 12 years in Congress, this is what I've learned. Smart is hard, dumb is easy. You can say really dumb stuff to people, and they will stand on the chairs and cheer for you. Tell them really dumb stuff, and they will cheer for you. You try to tell them smart stuff that you've struggled with and that they should struggle with. Oh man, that's rough. So and it is, but here's another sort of interesting thing. Orthodoxies appear fixed, but they're actually pretty flexible. So take one of those sins that you just enumerated, that I voted against a troop surge in Iraq. I'd been to Iraq 5 times, Afghanistan 4 times. I'd seen the most impressive people in the world. Not the Afghans or the Iraqis, they're fine, but I'm talking about the Americans serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I knew we could do it. What President Bush, who's my friend, and he is my friend, was talking about doing, I knew we could do it with the surge. But I wanted the Iraqis to be at the point of that spear, claiming their country back, rather than having Americans giving their lives for that. We needed the Iraqis to step up. And so that got me in some trouble with Republicans in South Carolina who said, "How dare you vote against our president?" Well, fast forward some number of years, Donald Trump trashed the whole effort in Iraq about once a month. And the same people stood on chairs and cheered for him. So it's like, in a way, it's sort of encouraging that political orthodoxies, well, if you don't like the orthodoxy of the moment, well, hang in there a little while. It's going to change. And so we were very much for George Bush and intervention around the world, because George Bush had this wonderful thought, and I'd share the thought that, one of his best lines ever was, "Freedom is not America's gift to the world. It's God's gift to mankind." It's something like that. I'm not quoting him exactly, but it's something very good like that is what George W. Bush said. I believe that. But then the question was, can you enforce it through military might? So, but then comes Donald Trump, as I say, and that whole, it's completely washed away. All those things that George W. Bush said about those high-minded things about freedom and God's gift to humankind. So, yes, I think that it's sort of encouraging that orthodoxies change.
Mm-hmm.
I think I lost there your question, though, Harrison. I'm not sure I'm answering.
It was just a brief thing. I mean, out of those sins, as you call them, are there anything any things there that you would revisit with hindsight and your opinion might be changed on them, or would you still stick with what you did in Congress?
In 2.0, I'd pretty much stick with it. 1.0, yeah, there are a lot of things that I'd change. Like you say, 1.0, I see in the mirror and I just cringe. But 2.0, you know, I just wish there'd been a way. Here's one thing that I do wish would be different about 2.0. The very sad thing is that I've just finished reading Barack Obama's volume 1, I guess, of his autobiography, A Promised Land. And it's mostly just sad. I mean, I listened to him for 19 hours. I listen to books more than read them. So it's just sad because I think that Barack Obama really did want to be a post-partisan president. He got there and he was cursed by his own success. He brought in a majority in the House, and so the result was that there was a reactionary force, or a reaction against him, and sadly, I think a lot of it was based on race, and not completely, but a fair amount of it was race. All those things about secret Muslim, non-American, socialist. It's all code language for, yo, there's a black man in a White House.
It's interesting because one of the other, actually 2 congressmen that we interviewed previously were both kind of the epitome of the traditional, more moderate Southern Democrat that you still saw throughout the House. You know, even though the presidential landscape of the South had largely changed, you still saw a lot of these rural Democrats. So they were both from Tennessee, Mark Gordon and Lincoln Davis. And Lincoln Davis said, I mean, Mark Gordon retired, so did John Tanner. So basically, Lincoln Davis was the only one of those 3 moderate Democrats in rural Republican districts that essentially voted for McCain to run for re-election. And he said that he had a 60, 70% approval rating from his campaign's internal polls, but he still lost by 20 points. And he really said that what finally soured the Democratic Party, if you will, in a lot of those rural districts throughout the South and the rest of the country was Barack Obama. And he did imply that it was because of his race. And a lot of these former Democrats or people that were okay with these down ballot Democrats kind of grew tired with them in that midterm, and they didn't like seeing Obama as the leader of the Democratic Party. And he was pretty clear on that.
Yeah, I think, and Lincoln's a good witness for that, because there you got a pro-life Democrat who was acceptable in the South, and then he became unacceptable, right?
And that was the story across the country in 2010. South.
Yeah, and so, and of course, I think you can read in Barack Obama's book that he knows that he made some mistakes too. It wasn't like he was perfect in reaching out to people like me or protecting people like Lincoln Davis.
No.
And by the way, I think Nancy Pelosi back then thought that she got power only occasionally, and when she got it, she was going to use that power, and so she rammed some things. I think she's learned from that and doing a little bit differently now. Still, the speaker is always a rammer, but I think she's a little bit more aware of some mistakes that they made with Barack Obama back then. But my point is that it's just sort of sad that in reading his book to miss the opportunity for post-partisanship. So in answer to your question, I wish that in 2.0, one thing that I wish I'd done even better was something about healthcare that where we could have been a more full participant in that, and of course climate change. So those were things that could have been better if that post-partisanship had taken over. But back to that pogo thing, we've met the problem, and the problem is us. If we are inclined to follow people who tell us that this other, whoever that other is our enemy and we must behead them. And if we get into identity politics and say, that's not our tribe, that's the other tribe, behead them. If those are the kind of leaders we follow, then we get what we deserve.
Yeah.
We get what we deserve out of our government. And so we got to find a way to, as citizens, say, no, you know what? We hear you telling me to other that other person, but reality is they look like just like me. To tell you the truth, this is English 2.0 speaking. Saved by grace looks like they need grace too. Now, one beggar found bread. Let me go share it with somebody else, or tell them where they can find it. I mean, that's a different deal. It leads to creative collaboration, where
Hmm.
you say to the Democrats, "Give us your best ideas." Okay, some of them are real clunkers. And then you say to the Republicans, "All right, give us your best ideas." Some of them are real clunkers. But together, perhaps you could come up with something that's actually pretty good. That's what the framers had in mind, by the way. When John Adams had an outline of the Constitution in his head, says David McCullough in that book, John Adams, before he got with Mr. Jefferson to write the Declaration. And as a guy who spent a long time in the Presbyterian Church, I'll tell you that I think it's because John Adams knew the Presbyterian form of government,
Hmm.
where there is wisdom in the plurality of the elders, but not in any one elder. And so that's what Adams saw. That's what the Constitution envisions. It's basically, hey, we need a House, we need a Senate, we need a president, we need to divide this power up. We need wisdom in the plurality of those offices, not in any one person.
Hmm.
And so to realize that, sure, the Democrats have some good ideas. Republicans have some good ideas. Both have clunkers in their idea pack. So you need to get rid of the clunkers and find the good ones, and then as a citizenry, decide, you know what, that's what we want. People who can solve stuff rather than people who are going to tell us that it's the other side or something. How long are we going to buy that snake oil? It's the question of the hour.
Yeah. And this kind of plays well into, there are three questions left. So this one deals with the rise of the Tea Party. So you previously warned that the rise of the Tea Party could pose problems for the GOP as a whole. And despite your lifelong record of conservatism going into your 2010 primary, you were one of many incumbents and challengers in primaries across the country in House and Senate races to lose to a Tea Party primary challenger. And I'm really just looking for your diagnosis here. I mean, looking at the primary electorate in the runoff, I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but you lost by 40 points, which I think is, from my analysis, more than any other incumbent in the primary in recent memory. So I'm just curious, can you talk a little about that campaign against Trey Gowdy and what Gowdy used against you to just hammer the electorate, to, I suppose, just completely work against you?
Yeah, I used to say, it's we become, I guess, what we say, right? But I used to say that Trey was really never Tea Party because, we had lunch one day together. We used to practice law together. I have a very brief time in the same law firm, and so just the two of us had lunch. I confessed all those sins that you enumerated earlier to him. Said, this is where I'm having trouble with this forming Tea Party. At the end of lunch, he told me, I'm a Bob Inglis kind of guy. I'm with you. 3 months later, he's running against me. Okay, so I don't know what happened those 3 months, but I don't think, I used to say that, wasn't really Tea Party, but I guess you become what you speak. And so maybe he became that.
Yeah.
But he didn't start out as a Tea Party guy. He started out as a very, very reasonable, capable fellow. And so, but I don't define Tea Partyism as reasonable, though, and I don't define it as capable, because the reason is that if you tell people dumb stuff and they cheer for you, you're not helping them. If you go to the doctor and he says, "Oh yeah, don't worry about, you don't need to diet, you don't need to exercise, you don't need to do any of that, it's okay." Well, that doctor's not helping you, and so you need people to help you to say, here's where we need to improve this thing on climate or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I'm getting distracted there with all my pontificating about that. I'm not answering your question, Harrison. What was it about the
just about the general campaign. I mean, do you remember the main? I mean, was it the carbon tax that Gowdy mostly used against you? Because it was such a big margin that a lot of people in our election community are just want to hear more about the internal dynamics of that campaign.
Yeah, well, I think it was just I was completely out of step with the Tea Party. You know what I thought? Well, here, I'll give you. Here's what really I had in mind. John Kasich had corrected me and another guy at a dinner long about 1995. John Kasich, the chairman of the budget committee, had all of us budgeteers for dinner at Jim Colby's house, and so who's also on the committee. And so John's sitting at the head of the table, and there's this guy who thankfully I can't see in my memory. I don't know who it was. It's really good that I don't know. And then it was me, because this guy was saying all this stuff to John Kasich about Hillary Clinton, about how about the black helicopters and about the whatever, all the crazy stuff about Hillary Clinton. And I'm sitting there, to my shame, in English 1.0, giving nonverbal assent, giving John the, yeah, what about that, John? John looks at the two of us and he says, why would you say that about her? She is a beautiful and brilliant woman. Why would you say that about her? And I said, oh, thanks, John. I needed that. That's an old commercial, Harrison. You're too young to remember it, but there's a hand that used to come out of a shaving cream commercial and slap the guy in the face. And so it's like, that's what I thought would happen in our race in 2010, is that people would say, oh, thanks, Bob. We needed that. We needed to hear from somebody that isn't going to tell us stupid stuff and isn't going to stand in front of us and just reward us at our lowest and least, challenge us to our highest and best. John Ashcroft's best line there when he was running for president, that was his best line, that lowest and least, highest and best thing. And so it didn't happen. People decided that, no, they wanted to hear the lowest and least. They wanted to hear that it was Barack Obama was a secret Muslim, non-American socialist, or if you didn't say it, just for goodness sakes, don't do what I did, which is a guy stood up at a campaign breakfast. He says, the President Obama is so unpatriotic. He doesn't put his hand over his heart when the pledge is recited or the national anthem is played. He sat down in disgust. And I'm sitting there thinking, what do you expect of a secret Muslim, non-American, socialist? Any of one of those would have done just fine at that moment.
Yeah.
And so I thought, can't do it, won't do it. And so I said to the guy, I've been with President Obama. I have seen him put his hand over his heart. What you've just said is simply not true. I said, the President Obama, is a loyal, patriotic American who loves his country, loves his wife, loves his kids. I just disagree with him on many things. Afterwards, a Republican operative came up to me and said, don't give him that. Good political advice, but not good soul advice, because you don't want to live that way, and you don't want to lead the country that way. So anyway, that's, I hope I'm answering your question there.
Yeah, you did. I mean, we're just in an interesting situation going ahead to the 2022 midterms, because there's someone else who could potentially end up like you, Tom Rice from the 7th District, southern coast of South Carolina. And again, he's a lifelong conservative without a doubt. No one can question that. But his one sin was voting for the second Trump impeachment. And already there's a slew of Republican challengers in the legislature trying to take him out in the primary next year, depending on what his district looks like. So, I mean, I guess that'll be another test. We've got about 10, 11 Republicans that voted for the second impeachment in the House seeking re-election. I mean, the real question at this point is how many of them survive. I mean, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and Anthony Gonzalez, they're already looking pretty vulnerable. And I don't know, then I guess I could just tie this into the other question. And it deals with the future of the Republican Party. So during the Trump era, which we're technically still in, given his influence over the party as a whole, what are some proposals that you would have when it comes to making the party more appealing to an increasingly younger, more diversified electorate over the next few decades, essentially. Do you think that there's still room for traditional independent-minded conservatism, or do we have to adapt? Or will the extreme faction win out? What's your thought on the future of the party?
I believe this nativism will decline because I think that it burns out. I pray that that's a little bit of a prayer, not as I don't know, so I hope so. But I think that's what happens is that people. Well, it's like this. When I was growing up, there was I won't use his last name, but Billy T. Billy T was having all these accidents. And his family, the T family, explained all the time that somebody ran into Billy. And so my dad used it as a teachable moment for me and the other 5 of us kids. Because he said, somebody's always running into Billy T. It can't be, it can't be that all these people keep on running into Billy T. And that's Trump. It's like at some point, don't we figure out another story of somebody running into Billy T? Another story of Donald Trump being put upon by somebody, the IRS or the banks that are gonna call the loans or the whatever or the election fraud. I mean, how many people got to run into Billy T, Donald Trump, before we start realizing, hey, Billy, maybe you don't know how to drive. Hey, Donnie, maybe it's you, buddy. Maybe you're the problem. And so I mean, it's what we found out in the town of Bluffton, South Carolina, is Billy T wasn't a good driver. At some point, I think the Republicans are going to figure out, hey, Donnie, you're no good. You're no good for us. Because you know what? You lost us the House. You lost us the Senate. You lost us the presidency. You're losing us a generation. Yo, this ain't working out for us. Because, Donnie, all those people you were counting on, well, there are a lot of funerals in that category of people. I mean, they're dying off. And so we need to be relevant to this next generation and show them that, yeah, we got ideas that work for things like climate change. You bet we do. We got ideas that work in free enterprise and individual responsibility and freedom and innovation. We've got those ideas and we're ready to act on them. Then people will reward you by saying, hey, you got good ideas, we'll vote for your party. But if you want to keep on telling me that if somebody else ran into Billy T, well, I'm going to stop believing you at some point because can't be that many bad drivers all finding Billy T. So anyway, I hope I protected the identity, my friend Billy T. But
Yeah, well,
anybody in Bluffton will know who I'm talking about.
well, the description fits really well into your organization. So the last question just deals with your organization. So can you talk about some of the major initiatives and accomplishments the organization has had since you founded it? And do you think that there's room going forward for a climate concerned faction in the GOP, given the rhetoric a lot of times leading up to the last election, at least, that you can't really care about climate change and be conservative at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an opportunity. It's like this. Even among Trump supporters, 30% of them were concerned about climate change. So we start there, let's say, and then we expand out into the people that maybe weren't so enamored with Trump and the Republican Party, and they know it's a real problem. I mean, you can either, what you want to believe is you want to have an argument with a thermometer. Really, it's not a good idea. I mean, it's just a measurement. And the measurement tells us that we've got a challenge. Now, the question is whether we as a party, the GOP, have any good ideas as to how to solve that problem. I think we do. I think we've got the best ideas. And I think they're based in free enterprise. And if you go to our website, republican.org, there's a 2-minute clip of Milton Friedman, one of Reagan's economics advisors, on the Phil Donahue show in the 80s. What do you do about pollution then, Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate it? Friedman says you tax it. you tax pollution. And then he goes on to explain how if you put the price in, the effect in that you're letting somebody get away with dumping on somebody else, if you make them be accountable for that, and isn't accountability a key conservative concept? It's something we really believe. Then blessings flow because you get innovation. That's what Friedman talks about in that 2-minute clip. That's what we conservatives can deliver in this debate about climate change before the left gets it wrong with big government. Because if they attempt to regulate our very breath, that's going to get really messy. But if we just put the price in, make it so that it applies to imports from other countries, don't grow the government with it by giving the money back from the pricing it in to the citizenry. So you haven't grown the government, you have gotten the world in on it, and you've unleashed the power of free enterprise. And then the political benefit for that, by the way, Harrison, is people saying, hey, that worked. And that's sound economics. And you people, you Republicans, you look like you got some good ideas. I think I don't mind associating with you. And that would win us a generation back that Donald Trump has tried to drive away single-handedly and shrink this party down to some angry old white guys. And I don't want to be that angry old white guy. I want to be somebody who says, yeah, we're ready to lead into the future, and we've got great ideas. They'll work in a pluralistic America.
So with that, those were all the questions. So, we were, again, very, very happy to have you on the show. Do you have any final thoughts at all on anything?
Great to be with you, Harrison. It's fun and great questions. And I hope all my storytelling didn't get too laborious there. But no, you're talking to a Southerner, so they got to tell stories. It's just the way it goes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of Blast from the Past. We'll be back in future weeks. We have 2 interviews scheduled. We just have to set the time. So thank you and have a good day.